people in the surrounding areas can put their arms around and say, you know, this isn't so bad. Or by saying to you, this is really horrible. How can you recommend to the mayor and council that they should recommend that 4,000 more units be built? Or 5,000? How do you do that? How do you tell them that they're going to have to build a new school or a new wing on the elementary school? Because you can't avoid kids just because it's a high-rise. She answered the question earlier. It goes up. The number of kids go up even with high-rise development. People have kids. I think the national average is 2.2 kids. I don't know how they got the 0.2, but they have 2.2 kids. So every unit, other than your single bedroom units, you can anticipate kids that need to go to school that you're going to have to build, that your taxes are going to have to pay for. So my questions, while long-winded and maybe repetitive, are just designed to ask the simple question, what's going to happen? And I can't get an answer. And even when I look at this map,
I will give you an answer. I will give you an answer. I've had time to now take an analysis look at the map and the zoning, and I can give you an answer.
okay, I'm all set.
My estimate would be 2,000 units. The only properties that are not developed under the R5 is the Quanta site. It's the only one. So I think there were some misstatements made that there will be properties that will add stories. The St. Moritz is one, and that's already 19 or 20 stories. Then we have the Alexander, which is currently under construction, and I'm pretty sure that they're not going to be adding more stories to that because they'd have to redo foundations for that building. And then the other zone, the other properties would be Waterford Towers and One Hudson Park. And those are also, again, somewhere between 15 and 19 stories. And again, it's a matter of physics and logic that they will not be redeveloped with a building that is greater in terms of number of stories. I think that there's also a misnomer in the fact that the only way that a building can go taller is that the building coverage is less. So there is a sliding scale in terms of the impact at the ground level and the height of the building, and there's still an FAR requirement. So the massing of the building will remain the same, and the density will remain the same. So I think that it was a misstatement that some of these properties can go up 50 stories, because then they'd have to chop off all parts of the building to reduce the building coverage in order to go up to 50 stories. So there is a relationship here that I think was missed in the statements made by the attorney. So in effect, what's left is the MXD3 zone and the MXD1 zone in terms of properties that have not been developed with something that's conforming that we are looking to change. And in terms of that density is 50 dwelling units an acre. So my estimate is 2,000 units.
What about the Qantas?
That's including the Quanta site. The Quanta site is 13 acres, and that would be, at 100 dwelling units an acre, that would be 1,300 units. And then when you take into account the mixed development that can occur in the MXD1 or MXD3 zones, what you're going to talk about in terms of units is 2,000.
So
That would be my estimate at this time.
That's
That would
3,300.
include the likes of Hess.
That's 3,000.
No, Hess has not been rezoned as part of this. Hess is a separate animal, as was discussed last time. That will be a subject of a redevelopment plan.
What did you say MXD1 and MXD2 would be maxed out?
Their densities are 50 dwelling units an acre.
I'm sorry?
Their dwelling units per acre is 50, not 100.
So that's 2,000.
So what did you estimate them out to be?
2,000?
Well,
You said Quonset is 13 acres and you can anticipate a maximum of 1,300 units. I'm asking you what you projected for MXD1 and 2.
it's not MXD2, it's MXD1 and MXD3.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And that would be a residual 700.
But your testimony that this one R5 zone, the MXD1 and the MXD3, will create a maximum of 2,000 units.
Give or take. I mean, it's not an exact analysis, but what I can tell you from the land area, because I didn't calculate every single lot, but just based on the land area that I know can be redeveloped, I would estimate that 700 units.
Okay, and this MXD1 is all of these existing D4 zones that you're turning into MXD1, that the cumulative total of all of them together with the MXD3 will only create 700 units?
No, the areas that have not been approved for a development that is in concert with MXD1 or MXD3.
So these
Meaning that there are parcels, and Aralex is an example. Aralex has already been approved. That is in the MXD1 zone. We also have the Maybao project in the MXD3 zone. That's already been approved. I'm talking about the areas that can be redeveloped that have not been approved with in a mixed-use development, such as the Aralex project.
Okay. I know this sounds like a stupid question, but why would you rezone lots if they can't be developed or you're not projecting that they will be developed?
We are hoping that they will be redeveloped.
So if all of everything, if your MXD3, the lot 93, and MXD1, all of that is a total of 700 units?
That, as I stated before, that has not already been approved for a project that is conforming to either of those zones.
It's not been approved, is it? If you change it to MXD3, can it then be approved?
Yes.
Okay. So the OR zone is the one zone that's north. And you're leaving along the water side the B3, the R3, and the R3 and B3. If I'm looking at your map, all of that is staying?
Yes.
Okay. And MCRD? There's a big yellow line on my map.
Yeah, MCRD is staying. It's developed a city place.
Okay. And then next to it is R5, is the Quanta site.
Yes.
And MXD1 adjacent to the Quanta site and next to IPAR.
Yes.
Is that empty or undeveloped at the time?
No, that's the pier. The pier, it's the pier portion of 115 River Road, and it is a mixed-use project. There are offices, residential, and a restaurant.
And what height can that go to?
In MXD1, the permitted height
It's an R5
Is-
now.
building heights, 5 stories.
Oh, okay.
Which one? So on your chart, your OR1, you said went to R5, so that's not correct?
Which property are you speaking
I
of?
don't know, I'm looking at your chart on page 27. You came down on here,
Yes.
it's R5. And
No, I corrected that.
area, you said R5.
No. No, I stated that block 96, lot 3.04 is to be rezoned MXD1. I stated that earlier this evening.
Okay, so it's no longer R5. And then the OR, below it, riparian, you have as R5?
Yes.
And the riparian is where?
That's part of the Quanta site.
So that's part of the R5 site that's in Yardley.
Yes.
and you change OR1 to R5?
Which parcel?
3.03.
To R5, yes.
So that has an unlimited height. Is that the yellow at the northernmost end?
No, it's the strip on top of NXD1, that is 115 River Road, which is an office building that is being knocked down because that area needs to be environmentally remediated.
Excuse me, Counselor.
This is in the
Excuse me,
old
Counselor, can I ask you a question just real quick? Have you been down there? Are you familiar? It seems like you're not really that familiar with what's out there. Have you been down there and looked at any of this stuff?
Yes, I have. As a
Okay,
matter
because
of fact, that's
no,
what-
because you just said in this, with regards to this NXD1 and the pier, it didn't seem like you were familiar with it at all.
No, I was looking at the pier down here, and
Well,
I
that's
was
not-
looking
yeah.
at her report.
I was just curious if you were down there. Have you seen this?
No,
site?
I haven't.
Okay, that's because
I
it
haven't.
didn't seem like you
And
were more familiar
and
with the map than
I
actually
promise you I
down
didn't walk
there.
on
Okay.
all the contaminated site and get my shoes.
Well, we've been contaminated for years now. This
I
is
know.
really,
I know.
that's why,
I walked-
yeah.
I followed the fence. I followed the fence.
No, but I think you should, no, to be honest with you, when you go to a meeting like this, to be honest with you, all your points are duly noted, and I appreciate everything you've gone over. But, you know, I think in a future meeting, maybe you should go down and actually walk, you know, or at least look around the town and see what we're talking about here.
Maybe she should.
Well, that's just.
Maybe she should make
But
sure.
I mean, that's just my opinion.
No,
Did you understand where I'm coming from like that?
Yeah, I do.
That's all, but all your points have been duly noted by me. Obviously,
And so I'm just trying to work her back. Now, the MXD3, what's the height limitation there? That's right behind the R5.
MXD3 is 9 stories.
9. And then behind it, you have MXD1, which is what?
I already answered 5 stories.
MXD1 is 5, MXD3 is 9, and in front of it, you have...
You know that it's located in the table right below the map.
Hmm?
It's located in the table right below the map. The whole table's right there.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
might be time for a 10-minute adjournment or 5-minute adjournment?
Actually, Council, how much longer do you think you're going to go?
I have like one question to ask her.
Okay, go ahead, please.
And I guess it's more for this board as well as for Ms. Gregory. And I recognize that there's been statements said that if there's a building existing, that you can't add stories. And if anybody is an engineer in this room, you know, you can do anything. And I've seen buildings where they built an exterior foundation, exterior supports on, literally on the outside of the building and went up. And my concern is that it's not a sleight of hand, but kind of pushing it off, those buildings that are already developed, that are being rezoned for something that is much more substantial than existing there, I think should be addressed by the planner to the board in order to explain maybe in a little bit more detail why an existing building is not brought into conformity and actually moves from one nonconformity to another technical nonconformity. I realize that you can build shorter than the height, but why would
Council,
you?
hold on a second. Just, is she correct with that statement? I don't,
No, isn't it the opposite where you're rezoning something that's existing to basically make, what a variance was granted for to make it conforming or closer to conforming?
Yes, that is correct. And again, in terms of the structural analysis of a building, I don't know how many times I need to say the fact that people can, developments cannot add additional stories unless they decrease their building coverage. So we do have a maximum permitted. We have a maximum height.
increase the building.
Increase the building height. We do have a maximum building height unless building coverage is decreased. Those buildings are existing, so they have a certain building coverage. So in terms of increasing the height, in order to go past the requirement of the R5 zone, you have to reduce your building coverage.
But they don't.
And the density will not change because you still have a density requirement, you still have an FAR requirement, and those buildings might meet the FAR requirement already. That analysis was not presented by the objector. And I think that they're making assumptions in their statements as well, because they're saying that I'm making lots of assumptions, but I actually did do some analysis. We did analysis of densities of FARs and the like, and there's no statements about what the density, what the maximum FARs are, or the FAR ratios of the existing buildings. So they may be maxed out already. And so, I think it's a misstatement by the attorney that these buildings can be increased, because I don't hear any evidence to the contrary.
Then I completely misunderstood everything she said at the beginning, because I specifically asked her whether or not a building that was existing was having rezoning so as to increase its height or its density, and she said yes, in order to keep it into conformity with the
She
zoning.
never said that. She never said that, Counselor. Matter of fact, she corrected you. She never said that. You brought that up twice. She said, in fact, she brought up, the reason I'm doing this, you didn't use conformity, in other words, then you said you didn't want to,
Well, a building is conforming in a zone, even if it doesn't meet the maximum height requirement. And the assumption is being made by the objector that every single property is going to be maxed out at a certain number of stories. But as I stated earlier, we have a density requirement and an FAR requirement. So the fact is that those buildings may have a density that is less than 100 dwelling units an acre, but they may have an FAR that meets the FAR permitted in the zone, because now we have also that requirement incorporated into our zoning ordinance. So there was never any evidence that was given about the FARs of those buildings. So there's, again, an assumption is being made that these buildings can increase in height, but just because they're not at, if they're at 10 stories and not 20 stories, they're conforming to the zone because they're not exceeding the requirement for the zone. And that's how they become conforming.
and
Because
you
they
did
meet
that.
the density,
Not
they meet
spots that you
the,
call
they're
it.
under the density, they're under the height, and they're under or meet the FAR. And that's how they are conforming.
But you also did that because you didn't want to have spots running through this whole area.
Correct.
There was an entire discussion about Mr. Burgess overestimating because he maxed out the changes based upon the lots and the blocks, where he just looked at a lot and block and said, well, you're moving it from R2 to R5, and therefore you're increasing X density, and on and on and on. And Ms. Gregory said that there's no reason that the existing buildings will change because the existing buildings are built. But she did not deny that her recommendations are going to take existing buildings and give them zoning that exceeds what is there. Is that correct? I mean, I understood you to be criticizing Mr. Burgess because he maxed out your changes even though there were existing buildings.
He only maxed out the changes in terms of density, and he didn't do an FAR analysis, so I don't think it was a fair comparison.
So the buildings that have existing buildings that are there by variance, that are 9 stories or 12 stories, you haven't recommended that their zoning be changed so that they could make 13 stories where there's 9? You
Yes.
haven't changed, you
Yes,
did?
they can. Yeah, yes, I have.
Okay. That was my issue,
Okay.
okay? It wasn't that I was changing her words, it was that she did in fact say that she was recommending zone changes to increase the height or density of an existing developed property. And I just want that clear on the record, I didn't misstate what she said.
Well, no, what you said a couple minutes ago was a mistake. She said, and I think the whole board has been going through this, is one of the reasons that she did that, and say again, because you didn't want to do spot zoning for the whole area, correct?
Yes, that's one of the reasons.
Right. And then, okay, what's the answer again for the show?
I feel like I'm just repeating myself
This will be it.
again and
We'll
again.
make a break, we'll have to the other public to come up.
Not only were we looking to try to assimilate several different projects into one zone, so that they would be conforming to our zoning ordinance. Clearly, our ordinance also, in terms of most of the zones, did not permit more than 30 dwelling units an acre that were not age restricted. So clearly that did need to change. And that is, again, supported by, we believe, the county's study. And when you get a little bit more site-specific, again, I will repeat myself, in terms of the R5 zoning, the types of projects that have been developed under the R5 zone, St. Moritz, One Hudson Park, those are obviously tall, more slender type buildings, and that's the type of building that we were looking for in the R5 zone, so that we would still keep the views to the corridor. So again, that is a little bit more site-specific, if you will, but we thought that it was appropriate, given the context of what's around it, given the fact that we want to we want to preserve the views to the river,